Hi everyone, the topic for today is different types of tooth movements in orthodontics. First is tipping. Tipping is tooth movement with greater movement of the crown of the tooth than of the root. It can be further classified based on the location of the center of rotation into controlled tipping and uncontrolled tipping. Now, what is uncontrolled tipping? When only a force is applied at the bracket to move a tooth, the force alone will cause the tooth to move in the correct direction, but the crown will also tip in that direction while the apex moves in the opposite direction. In this case, no moment has been applied to prevent the tipping that has occurs. The moment to force ratio applied is 0. In this case, the equivalent force system at the center of resistance is the force plus a moment that will tip the crown in the direction of the force. Without a moment to counteract the tendency of the tooth to tip in the direction of the force, the center of resistance of the tooth moves in the direction of the force. The crown moves further than the center of resistance and the apex moves in a direction opposite to the force. The tooth appears to have rotated around a point just apical to its center of resistance. Therefore, the center of rotation when the moment to force ratio is 0 is just apical to the center of resistance. Now next is controlled tipping. Application of a force at the bracket to move a tooth also results in a tendency of the tooth to tip. To counteract this tipping, a countermoment in the form of a couple can be applied to the tooth. Thus, when a moment to force ratio of 7:1 is applied at the bracket, the equivalent force system at the center of resistance is a force to move the tooth, plus a small net tendency for the crown to tip in the direction of the force. The tooth appears to have rotated around its apex. So, the center of rotation when the moment to force ratio is 7:1 is at the apex of the tooth, and only crown movement occurs. Now, the next type of tooth movement is translation. When a force to move a tooth is applied at a bracket that is 10 mm away from the center of resistance, a tendency for the tooth to tip is created that is 10 mm times the magnitude of the force. To counteract the tendency for tipping, a couple can be applied intentionally to produce a moment of equal magnitude in the opposite direction. The force alone would cause the tooth to move in the direction of the force and the crown to tip in the same direction. The couple completely negates this tendency to tip, but the tooth still moves in the direction of the force. The moment to force ratio applied is 10:1. So, when a moment to force ratio of 10:1 is applied at the bracket, the equivalent force system at the center of resistance is a single force with no net moment. The tooth translates in the direction of the force with no tipping. The center of rotation is considered to be at infinity because no rotation occurs. Now, what is root movement? In the same example, when the countermoment applied intentionally at a bracket is more than 10 mm times the magnitude of the force applied, the tooth moves in the direction of the force but the crown tips in the opposite direction. The force alone would cause the tooth to move in the direction of the force and the crown to tip in the same direction. The couple applied negates the tendency to tip, but the center of resistance still moves in the direction of the force while the crown does not. Here, the equivalent force system at the center of resistance is a force to move the tooth plus a small net tendency for the root to tip in the direction of the force. The moment to force ratio is 12:1 or 13:1 at the bracket. The tooth appears to have rotated around its crown. Therefore, the center of rotation is at the crown of the tooth, and only root movement occurs. Next is pure rotation. If only a couple and no net force is applied to a tooth, the tooth will rotate around its center of resistance, and will not translate. The forces of the couple cancel out any tendency for the center of resistance to move, but the moment produced by the couple causes the tooth to tip. The moment to force ratio is infinite and the center of rotation is coincident with the center of resistance. Thanks for watching. Like and subscribe to the channel.